Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Hegemony in discourse analysis. Hegemony in discourse analysis refers to the ways in which dominant groups in society maintain control over others through language, ideology, and cultural practices rather than through overt force. The concept, rooted in the work of Italian Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci, involves the subtle, often unconscious, reinforcement of a dominant ideology that becomes accepted as common sense, or the natural order of things. In discourse analysis, the focus is on how language contributes to the construction and maintenance of hegemony, shaping social realities in ways that support the interests of dominant groups. Through the analysis of discourse, researchers examine how certain ideologies are privileged, while others are marginalized or silenced. Hegemony operates through the production and circulation of discourses that represent specific values, beliefs, and power structures as normal, desirable, or inevitable. By studying hegemonic discourse, analysts can uncover the underlying power dynamics and explore how language perpetuates inequality or, conversely, how it might challenge the dominant order. 1. Key concepts of hegemony in discourse analysis. Naturalization of dominant ideologies. Making power structures appear normal or common sense. A central aspect of hegemonic discourse is its ability to make dominant ideologies seem natural or inevitable, so that the social, political, or economic status quo is accepted without question. Through everyday language, cultural practices, and media representations, the dominant worldview is framed as the only or the right way to see reality. Common sense. Dominant ideologies become accepted as common sense truths that are rarely questioned or challenged. These ideologies shape how people understand their roles in society and what they consider possible or legitimate. Naturalization. The process through which socially constructed ideas, beliefs, and power relations are presented as natural or normal, making it difficult for people to recognize them as products of particular historical and social conditions. Example: in economic discourse, the language of free markets and competition is often naturalized, with terms like efficiency and innovation framed as universally positive, while other economic models, e.g., socialism, are marginalized or viewed as inefficient. This naturalization supports a capitalist ideology and reinforces the idea that free markets are the only viable economic system. Consent and coercion. Gaining widespread agreement without overt force. Hegemony operates through consent rather than coercion, meaning that people accept the dominant ideology not because they are forced to but because they have internalized its values. Discourse plays a key role in gaining this consent by framing certain ideas as desirable or in everyone's best interest, even when they primarily benefit the dominant group. Manufacturing consent. Dominant groups use discourse to shape public opinion, making it appear that their interests align with those of the general population. Media, education, and political discourse are often key sites where this consent is produced. Subtle control. While coercion involves direct force or repression, hegemonic discourse relies on subtle forms of influence, persuading people to adopt certain beliefs and practices without recognizing the power dynamics at play. Example: political discourse on national security often emphasizes the need for surveillance and control to protect freedom and safety. Citizens may consent to increased government surveillance, believing it is in their best interest, without questioning the potential erosion of civil liberties. The discourse frames security measures as common sense and downplays their more controversial aspects, like privacy infringement. Marginalization of alternative discourses. Silencing or devaluing non-dominant voices. Hegemony works not only by promoting certain discourses but also by marginalizing or silencing alternative perspectives. Discourses that challenge or oppose the dominant ideology may be framed as irrational, unpatriotic, or extremist, making them less likely to gain traction in public debate. Exclusion of voices. Certain groups, ideas, or perspectives may be excluded from mainstream discourse, limiting their ability to influence social or political outcomes. Delegitimization. Alternative discourses may be delegitimized through language that dismisses or ridicules their proponents, portraying them as irrelevant, unrealistic, or dangerous. Example: in the environmental discourse surrounding climate change, voices that call for radical changes to the economic system, such as degrowth or anti-capitalist approaches, are often marginalized. Instead, the dominant discourse focuses on market-based solutions like carbon trading and green technology, sidelining more systemic critiques that challenge the logic of endless economic growth. Interpolation and identity formation. Shaping individuals' social identities through discourse. Hegemonic discourse shapes not only public opinion but also individual identities, or how people see themselves and their roles in society. This process, known as interpolation, a concept from Louis Althusser, involves hailing individuals into particular social roles or identities through language, encouraging them to adopt the values and beliefs of the dominant ideology. Identity construction. Discourses position individuals as certain types of subjects, citizens, workers, consumers, etc., and encourage them to internalize these roles. This positioning influences how people think about themselves and their place in society. Subjectivity. Individuals are made subjects through discourse, meaning that their beliefs, desires, and actions are shaped by the dominant narratives they encounter in their everyday lives. Example: in advertising, consumers are often interpolated as individuals whose happiness and identity depend on material goods. Advertisements that say, "You deserve luxury," or "Upgrade your life," position individuals as consumers who derive self-worth from what they buy, aligning personal fulfillment with capitalist consumption. Reproduction of social inequality. Sustaining hierarchies and power imbalances. Hegemony sustains and reproduces social inequality by reinforcing hierarchies related to class, race, gender, and other social divisions. Through discourse, dominant groups justify their privileged position while masking the structural inequalities that benefit them. Social stratification. Discourse can reinforce class structures, racial hierarchies, or gender roles by framing certain groups as naturally superior or more deserving of resources and opportunities. Legitimization of power. Language is used to legitimize existing power relations, making inequality appear justified or inevitable. This can involve appeals to meritocracy, hard work, or natural differences between groups. Example: in workplace discourse, the narrative that anyone can succeed if they work hard enough supports a meritocratic ideology that justifies income inequality. This discourse obscures structural barriers, such as systemic racism or gender discrimination, that limit equal access to success, making social inequalities appear as the result of individual failure rather than institutional bias. Challenging hegemony. Counter-hegemonic discourses. Resisting and undermining dominant ideologies. While hegemony tends to reinforce dominant ideologies, it can also be challenged through counter-hegemonic discourses that question the status quo and offer alternative ways of seeing and organizing society. These discourses seek to expose the power structures embedded in dominant narratives and provide a space for marginalized voices to be heard. Subversion of dominant ideologies. Counter-hegemonic discourses aim to disrupt the dominant ideology by offering alternative perspectives and narratives that challenge accepted norms. Empowerment of marginalized groups. These discourses often emerge from social movements, activist groups, or marginalized communities, providing a platform for voices that are typically excluded from mainstream discourse. Example: the #MeToo movement represents a counter-hegemonic discourse that challenges the normalization of sexual harassment and assault. By sharing personal stories of abuse, survivors and activists disrupt the dominant narrative that minimizes or excuses such behavior, pushing for social and legal reforms that address gender inequality and power imbalances. Point 2. Examples of hegemony in discourse analysis. Example 1. Media discourse and neoliberalism. Neoliberalism has become a dominant ideology in much of the world, promoting the ideas of free markets, privatization, and individualism. Media discourse often naturalizes these ideas by presenting them as common-sense solutions to economic and social issues, making alternative economic models, like socialism or communalism, appear radical or impractical. Example: news coverage of welfare programs may use terms like entitlements or handouts, framing welfare recipients as burdens on society, while simultaneously glorifying corporate success as evidence of hard work and merit. This discourse reinforces the neoliberal ideology that emphasizes individual responsibility over collective support, marginalizing discussions about wealth redistribution or systemic inequality. Example 2. Political discourse and nationalism. Political leaders often use nationalist discourse to create a sense of unity and loyalty to the nation, while marginalizing groups that are perceived as outsiders or threats. This can create a hegemonic narrative of us versus them, where the nation's values and interests are portrayed as universally shared, even when they primarily benefit a specific elite. Example: in anti-immigration political rhetoric, terms like illegal alien or invasion frame immigrants as dangerous outsiders who threaten national security and cultural identity. This discourse serves to justify restrictive immigration policies and reinforces a hegemonic view of national identity that excludes diversity and downplays the contributions of immigrant communities. Example 3. Educational discourse and meritocracy. The discourse surrounding education often emphasizes meritocracy, the idea that hard work and talent are the primary determinants of success. This discourse naturalizes educational inequalities by framing them as individual failures rather than systemic issues, thereby supporting a hegemonic ideology that favors the privileged. Example: in educational policy discussions, phrases like achievement gap or failing schools are often used to discuss underperforming schools without acknowledging the structural factors, like underfunding or systemic racism, that contribute to these outcomes. This discourse reinforces the belief that students and schools succeed or fail based on effort alone, obscuring broader social inequalities. Conclusion: hegemony in discourse analysis provides a lens for understanding how language shapes power relations and reinforces dominant ideologies. Through processes like naturalization, consent, marginalization of alternative perspectives, and identity formation, hegemonic discourse helps maintain social order by making power structures appear normal and inevitable. However, this dominance is not uncontested, as counter-hegemonic discourses challenge these structures and offer alternative ways of seeing and organizing society. By analyzing hegemonic and counter-hegemonic discourses, researchers can uncover the subtle mechanisms through which language sustains or disrupts social hierarchies and power imbalances. Frequently asked questions. What is hegemony in discourse analysis? Hegemony in discourse analysis refers to the ways dominant groups maintain control over others through language, ideology, and cultural practices, rather than through overt force. It focuses on how dominant ideologies are constructed as common sense or natural, shaping social realities and reinforcing power structures. How do dominant ideologies become naturalized in discourse? Naturalization occurs when dominant ideologies are presented as natural, inevitable, or common sense, making them difficult to question. This process hides their constructed nature, leading people to accept them without realizing they are socially produced. How does hegemony gain consent from the public? Hegemony gains consent by using discourse to align the dominant group's interests with those of the broader public. It shapes public opinion through media, education, and politics, making people believe that the dominant ideology serves everyone's best interests, even when it primarily benefits those in power. How are alternative discourses marginalized in hegemonic systems? Alternative discourses are marginalized by being excluded, silenced, or delegitimized. The dominant discourse may frame opposing views as irrational, extremist, or unrealistic, preventing them from gaining legitimacy in public debate. What role does identity formation play in hegemonic discourse? Hegemonic discourse shapes individual and collective identities by hailing people into certain social roles, such as consumers or citizens. This process, known as interpellation, encourages individuals to adopt the values and beliefs of the dominant ideology. How does discourse help reproduce social inequality? Discourse reinforces social inequality by legitimizing hierarchies of class, race, and gender. It portrays these inequalities as natural or deserved, masking the structural forces that perpetuate them and framing them as the result of personal effort or failure. What are counter-hegemonic discourses? Counter-hegemonic discourses challenge the dominant ideology, offering alternative perspectives and narratives that question the status quo. These discourses often arise from marginalized groups and social movements seeking to expose power imbalances and propose new ways of organizing society. How does media discourse contribute to neoliberal hegemony? Media discourse often promotes neoliberal ideologies by naturalizing concepts like free markets and privatization, while framing alternative economic models, e.g., socialism, as impractical or extreme. This reinforces the belief that neoliberalism is the only viable economic system. Can you give an example of hegemonic political discourse? Nationalist political discourse often frames immigrants as dangerous outsiders who threaten national security and identity. By using terms like illegal alien or invasion, this discourse justifies restrictive immigration policies and marginalizes diverse communities, reinforcing a hegemonic view of national identity. How does educational discourse reinforce the ideology of meritocracy? Educational discourse often emphasizes meritocracy, suggesting that success is based solely on hard work and talent. This framing obscures structural issues like underfunding and systemic racism, reinforcing the idea that educational inequalities are individual failures rather than results of broader social conditions.